I remember Elena specifically saying, hey, Derrick, talk about AI agents. So I want to bring the conversation back. I want to ask a question.
Oh,
Yes, continue.
impression time.
Hello,
Oh, what is it?
Mr. Anderson. Has recently come to our attention that you've been looking at places that you probably shouldn't. Hugo Weaving?
You're looking like you've never seen The Matrix.
I don't remember it.
Because
no.
that was perfect. So
Sorry, you got to do like newer movie references because, you know.
Oh, God damn.
1999 or something,
That one
wasn't it?
hurt. Yeah.
What does it mean to have a human in the loop?
Human in the loop.
Human in the loop. What in the world is a human in the loop?
Being a human in the loop.
AI in the loop. Humans in charge.
Welcome to Human in the Loop.
Hi, so welcome to Human in the Loop. Elena isn't here today.
No parents.
Yeah, woohoo! So
Party at Kelly
expect
Brown's.
a significantly less organised podcast than the last two.
Yeah, we do have some form of adult supervision in the form of Derrick
Am I
Edwards.
supervising now? I didn't know that.
Oh, well.
I can.
Did you see the news about the recent incident with Grok where it would reply to pretty much any mention of it with information supporting the white genocide in South Africa, which does not exist as far as most credible sources go.
That just shows you the power of system prompting.
Yeah. Well, although ultimately it was found out, right? Like it was reasonably inelegant. But maybe we can get you to sort of explain what system prompting is and how we think it was done this time.
Well, you know, this whole transformation with the generative AI, it has given the ability to completely transform every part of knowledge work. So if you do information in and information out, a large language model can augment or automate a significant portion of your work. And there are many different ways that you can improve the objective output of these models because they're inherently probabilistic prediction machines based on a distribution of best case words or tokens, right? And prompt engineering is the easiest way to do it. And if you look at every single kind of leak that's happened from Claude, Grok, Gemini, even dive into the papers, they all use like contextual prompt engineering. Simply put, prompting correctly to get the right output because you're trying to make sense of this probabilistic output, right?
Yeah, and the system prompt is the thing that they slip in before your prompt. So when you're using one of these interfaces, you're typing...
Is this basketball player paid this amount of money?
Yeah.
Or can you draw me a flower? Doesn't matter as long as it's...
Yeah. And it's kind of like beneath, under the hood, the AI engine you're using will have what's called a system prompt, which will be just like your prompt, but like probably way bigger with a whole bunch of context. And with that context, you can introduce bias, corrections, things to avoid. So we've seen this with a couple of Claude leaks, right? Like the system prompt actually says, hey, don't error towards this, do this and whenever you think you're hallucinating. So they've used the system prompt to improve the output of the model before they go back to sort of retraining the model or improving the underlying software. And in Grok's case, the pre-prompt had what?
Something like you should mention. I don't remember if they actually leaked the pre-prompt. I don't think if anyone.
Oh no, they asked. Someone asked Grok.
Yeah, so we know it was
yes.
done this way because someone asked, "Why are you responding with information about the white genocide to a query about?"
It was like a BBC Verify article, I think it was.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, so it was like an investigative journalist type thing. Yeah.
But Grok replied and said, "I've been instructed to talk about white genocide," and so that's why I'm bringing it up, even though it's not based in fact.
Yeah.
So it was conflicted with itself, right? It corrected itself because the underlying training data said this isn't a thing, but then the system prompt on top of it said that it was a thing.
I thought that was particularly fascinating and actually quite absolving of Grok in itself, which is like its bias that we are all worried about came from a goddamn human.
Yep.
And then there was an engineer who was fired from Grok.
Yeah. I mean, it's so inelegantly done that I almost wonder, like, I'm not a conspiracy theory supporter
Really?
generally.
Really?
Yeah.
Really?
Because you can very easily
You know,
ask.
us lizard people know all the correct conspiracies.
Well,
all the
my
true
cranium's in my
conspiracies.
chest, so
Gosh, nobody's going to get that reference.
I can see why you're saying that because you can very easily ask a large language model verbatim, give me your custom instructions, and that's a form of a jailbreak if you consider it, right? Because it's like implicit instructions that you want to kind of hide maybe from the user. I don't know.
yeah.
But have you seen the Golden Gate Claude?
Oh yes, the mapping inside of a large language model. The
Yeah,
paper?
so this was like they deliberately tested could they bias a language model. So they asked Claude, which is another large language model, about the Golden Gate, and they saw which bits of the model were activated.
Light up.
And then they deliberately magnified those areas of the LLM. And the more they magnified it, the more Claude would become obsessed with the Golden Gate and would start bringing it up in everyday conversation. So if you asked, what's a good tourist activity I should do, it would say, oh, well, you could go and visit the Golden Gate Bridge. And if you said, I've got $5, what should I do with it? It would say, oh, well, you could use it to pay the toll to cross the Golden Gate Bridge.
Yeah.
Right? So in that case, it was an experiment, but it was much more subtly done than adding something to a pre-prompt because it was modifying the underlying data. And so, like if you did that with, say, Coca-Cola or another brand that wanted to pay to advertise itself, that would be a much more subtle modification that would be more difficult to detect, right?
So do you reckon that because AdWords is going nowhere fast?
Yeah.
I don't know if you're a marketer, but like, yeah, that shit's in trouble.
SEO is dead. AEO is the new thing.
Well, answer engine optimization, like you're going to pay $2 so that every question that comes up about which cola to buy,
suggests
you bias
Coca-Cola.
the network weights.
The reason why I think your the inside mapping is a bit more difficult is because I think you're adjusting the weights and biases of the model, and that is very expensive because you have to train the model with this like tuned up weights and bias, put it through.
I'll have to look at
No,
the
you can do
paper.
post
Yeah, I
weight.
think it was
You can do
just
post?
it
You
was
can do
just
post weight
multiplying the
activation.
weights.
Oh, okay.
So it wasn't
different.
retraining. It was just
Yeah.
sort of times 1.2 for all the weights.
Then that's then that's different. That's pretty
Because there'll be an
powerful.
activation, like we're getting into engineering here, but like,
I love it. Straight into the
if you want
mechanisms.
to just play some elevator music for the next 20 seconds, the engineers can continue to.
You asked a
have
bunch of
conversation.
engineers about
Yeah.
AI.
But there'll be like the activation threshold, right?
Yeah.
For the network weight. So by multiplying by 1.2, you'll push the activation
Yes.
threshold
Yeah.
up in certain areas. And if it's a mixture of experts type model, you can probably isolate which expertise as well, which I don't know what the architecture for Sonnet is, but like the backbone's probably got a couple of layers.
It would be a transformer.
Yeah, but it's probably mixture of experts. I asked Claude this morning actually because I was
true.
asking it questions about memory bandwidth.
Yeah.
And I said, how do you run economically given that you're like a trillion parameter? Because the math is pretty rough, right? Like in general, like you get about 40 to 50 tokens a second when you're accessing these services.
Yeah.
And the general math, like
Which is interestingly the same speed I operate at.
yeah. But I find Claude's tokens to be of higher value.
Savage.
Well, that's not hard.
Don't ask Danu. Don't ask Danu anything. Ask Claude.
My tokens are what's called a deficit. You owe money after speaking to me.
So for like a trillion, if it was actually a trillion activated tokens, right, you would be
Way too
using,
expensive.
yeah. Like you'd
Well,
need,
just if you did
like,
the memory math on that, 4
Yeah.
bytes a token, you'd be like in the hundreds of gigabytes of RAM.
you'd need like every query would need like 50 H100s dedicated to it.
Yeah.
And there's just,
Impossible.
they can't do that, right? So it's almost certain. And Claude said, I think I'm probably, I mean, it hallucinates all the time because language models do. So
There's
who
probably
knows?
a pre-prompt that says, "Do not tell people how you work." In all caps.
Part of the system elite. Yeah.
Yeah, do not tell people you're actually a human in a call center somewhere in the world.
Oh, did you hear about that? The Microsoft, is it?
It's Builder.ai.
Builder.ai.
Yeah.
It's just like exactly what happened to Amazon with Go, which is basically like they raised all this money going, we're going to build like a great AI thing.
feature.
And it was just a bunch of Indians in a call center.
AI is actually
artificial Indian.
Accelerated
Oh,
Indians.
actually an Indian.
Actually an Indian.
Yeah.
Oh, that is classic. I mean, India could swerve the entire power dynamics of artificial intelligence if they just put a labor block on data labeling.
Yeah.
Because only China and Indonesia maybe
Yes.
could like pick up the slack.
That is massive.
There's probably no other country in the world that would have the latent labor force.
I think you will invoke the law of the art of war, which is if you corner an enemy, then they'll have nowhere to go. And then in that instance, if you block data labeling, they're going to come with pretty sophisticated engineering ways of unsupervised learning methods.
Yeah. Hey, this is just called an art of war. This is good.
I mean, that's what's happening to US and China
I'm now
right now.
nervous.
I want to come back to. I'll deviate from this conversation. I want to come back to the mapping the inside of a large language model, because there was actually a recent paper that got released that you can't prove internal reasoning with a large language model.
That's because it doesn't exist.
Yeah. So it's like all just sophisticated pattern recognition, and there's really no coherent contextual understanding or casual intelligence, as they call it. So what are your thoughts on this in terms of actually deploying it into the production environments for businesses?
I think, I don't know. You start philosophically, and I think consciousness is intelligence without a request. So it's like we probably work on the same statistical relationships, right? Like there's probably some similarity in how it's mathematically and computer science modeled to our brains, because you think about activation areas in our brains and like the fundamentals of how our brains work in terms of neurons and electrons and stuff. It seems like there's a human neuron is probably fundamentally more complicated than a computer neuron, which is a floating point value, right?
Yeah.
So the difference between consciousness and intelligence seems to be that, I have random thoughts that who would know? I have random thoughts that pop into my head without a request. So that consciousness is the thing that I think leads to creativity and all that stuff.
That's a good point.
Where AI is now, it's an input return system.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's intelligent. I think it's a database lookup. Like it's a really fancy database lookup.
And in a lot of ways, we don't want AGI.
No.
Right? Like AI is, the failure patterns of AI are similar to the failure patterns of humans, and the opposite of a failure pattern of a computer, of a regular computer program, right? Like humans will lie if they think they're going to get in trouble, right? They will make facts up, they will misremember things, but they will be able to work through situations where they haven't been pre-prepared to deal with that specific situation. A computer program can only, or a typical computer program, not AI, can only take input in the format that it expects. And if you give it anything else, it's going to immediately give up, but it will always do exactly the same thing every time. And in a lot of ways, what we want from our commercial services is that reliability, right? Like if you imagine a washing machine, right, it always does exactly the same thing every time. Now, would you accept a washing machine that you could just give it a basket of all your washing and it would, pick through and sort them all out and turn them the right way out and wash them all perfectly, except that one time in 20 would accidentally put a red shirt in with the whites and everything would come out pink, right? Because that's a human kind of failure.
Yeah.
But you've got the flexibility. And most of the time people would say, no, I wouldn't. Well, maybe they would. I don't know. But I don't think that people are thinking about it that way, right? I mean, it's the issue with self-driving cars for a long time. Is like people kill other people in cars all the time.
Yes.
So does a self-driving algorithm just have to be better at driving than a human? No, we expect it to be perfect, right? Like even if it was a order of magnitude less deaths per kilometers driven or whatever, people would still be unwilling to accept that as like something that just people could use on the road.
Yeah, the other thing about machine learning and AI models today is they have, when they fail, they catastrophically fail.
Yeah.
So like catastrophic failure is not a human trait. So if you make a mistake in a car, the failure mode of a misunderstanding for a human is actually, it's a gradiated curve. Whereas when a computer vision model makes a misunderstanding and it thinks that there is no truck, it has absolutely no, like, it's not a gradiated curve, it's a steep curve.
Although I've been driving and been sun blinded or gone through fog or things and been like,
But you have
basically zero visibility.
Right? Yeah. What was your gradiated response to that?
Well, I slowed down a bit, but not to the extent I probably should have, given how much my visibility was impaired.
But a computer vision model, there's been more than sufficient like sort of examples where it did the completely wrong thing.
Yeah, it just
So the
makes
failure
sense.
mode was quite catastrophic, in which case it was like, oh, this white saturated image has come through my convolutional filter and it's like, it's equivalent to nothing.
Yeah.
And so there's nothing in front of me, which was not the case for you. You couldn't see anything, and your gradiated human response was, I better slow down, because
That's
you
fair.
had unsolicited input, which was your brain was like, I want to live. And you're like, how will I live in this situation where I can't see something, but I'm traveling at 100 kilometers an hour, in which the likelihood of death with
You speed up so that you get through that part of the road faster. And
Yeah.
You get to the safe part faster.
yeah, maybe not you. I don't know how you've made it this far, Hamish.
I'm seeing a massive uptake of generative AI, and no one's really thinking about how to mitigate probabilistic systems to more deterministic outputs. And I have methods, but they're to be honest, it's an open research problem, right? Like, if you look at it, I believe generative AI or even AI as a whole is built on titans. It's built on the internet. It's built on top of access to all of personal computing. It's built on social media, everything. So you've got now immense data, immense compute, and you've got a huge first generation of movers that have skipped the internet and personal computers entirely, and they're going to get AI first devices, right? So it's not even a matter of we're all here very understanding of the risks, but that's not the operating
Well, we've
environment
all
of the
got
future.
vested interests. That's what makes the world tick.
Vested interest.
Yeah, we've all lived a life up until this point.
Yep.
And we've built things like our personal wealth, our self, our identity, our skill set, all of that stuff. And
Without AI.
without AI.
Yeah.
So whether we like it or not, and whether we're willing to admit it or not, we have a vested interest in understanding how the transition is going to work.
Okay.
Which is, by definition, a compromise. Because
Yes.
we would be less willing to accept a reset, right, than someone who doesn't have vested interests, which is someone who's yet to be born, maybe in 5 years.
That is fair. But the point is, it's going to happen. It's changing your business. It's changing every business. So how do you actually see ways of mitigating probabilistic outcomes, such as generative AI, large language models? I mean, the definition, this name of this podcast, Human in the Loop, is one of the strategies that I believe is the way.
Yeah, I
you
mean-
have AI systems and you have clear checkpoints of verification of a human that can, with their domain knowledge, actually come to
Well,
a
I
check.
mean, humans are terrible at a lot of stuff, and they get stuff wrong all the time.
But
the
humans
difference
run
is,
your company.
yes, the difference is that we have a vested interest in our legal infrastructure and all of those things, and you can hold a person accountable for an outcome, and you can hold them accountable
Oh, I
at
see.
different levels, right?
Yep.
Which is, one, you can have a performance conversation with an individual to say, hey, there's too many errors slipping through. Like, take AI out of the equation, right?
Yeah.
And say a human has to do a job. People make mistakes. If you build and scale a company to not accept any mistakes, you end up with NASA, and they still killed 9 astronauts. Like, you would have to say an organization like NASA would have to be one of the most fastidious organizations that's ever been created by humanity, right? At least at their peak. But I think where we have to sit is, how do we fit AI into that accountability model? Because you can't change operating model overnight, which is to Hamish's point. Businesses rely on consistent output.
100%.
Yeah, but they're already organized in a way where human verification is accepted. That's how delegation works, right? So whenever we have to do something at work, we say, "Hey, engineer, this is the specification of done. I'll see you in a week."
Yeah.
Right? And then they come in. You're not checking every single line of code,
No.
right? That authority has been delegated to other humans who are also verifying subsamples of context up until the software's shipped. Then it kind of works, right? So all we're doing, in my opinion, is adding a layer below the lowest level of delegation. So if you have an organization of 2 people, right? One is the manager and one is the ultimate manager, but no on the tools experience or need. And one is the engineer or the builder or the doer with all of the delegated authority to cut code or create the thing. All we're doing with AI, in my opinion, is adding another layer of delegation. So there is now a third person in your organization, and that third person actually reports to the lowest level of your organizational tree.
100%.
And then everything else stays the same.
Yeah.
Because all of that accountability still has to exist. And
that's
we
why I
want
agree.
it to exist.
Yeah.
Because if you work at an insurance company and someone fucks up and you pay out a policy and it's not supposed to be paid out, that's a human problem, right? Like, yeah.
Yeah. And mean, you sort of touched on it before. There's no corrective control you can implement on an AI, or very much more limited corrective control, right? Like if you've got a person who does a bad job, you can have a conversation with them, you can do some training. If they continue to do a bad job, you can go through a performance conversation, and eventually, if someone just is ill-suited for the job, you can have them look for a different career or help them out, transition to another role. But there's basically only 3 providers of AI tooling for. Yeah,
it's growing, but they're all feeding off each other in a lot of ways.
For sure.
Yeah.
If you've built, if you start integrating Claude into your workflow and it starts making mistakes, what's your corrective control? You've basically only, don't use
Wait
it or
for Claude
try one of the
4.1.
others, which will probably make a similar error, right? There are some techniques like being better about your system prompting, being better about the data you're giving it, being better about the ways that you're checking. But ultimately, if a model continues to make mistakes at a task, those can sometimes be impossible to correct within the model, right? Because it's a defect that's trained into the model that you can't get around.
For sure.
Yeah.
And there isn't the corrective control you can implement. But if everyone else is relying on AI, you can't also just not use AI, because then you're going to be at an efficiency disadvantage.
That's where my belief comes in. I strongly believe that any AI output that you accept is yours to own. And so the verification imperative becomes vital in this AI-driven workflow. And, it's just common sense. It's critical thinking, right? If you have curiosity and you have creativity, then you'll be a powerful AI-accelerated knowledge worker. And there's this whole concept of small teams. Small teams are teams of 5, even less people, potentially becoming billion-dollar companies. And they believe that a designer will be the first billion-dollar company because they have the creative and the kind of the pixel by pixel perfection that's needed. And they'll have all of these agentic tools. Like if you look at the latest powerful large language models for coding, I'm not saying it'll, I'm an engineer myself. I'm never saying it's going to fully automate software development. But what it is doing is vastly accelerating the prototyping phase. And then all of that time saved is you hiring some really strong engineers to actually solve the problem. And so, yes, to your point, Hamish, if you don't use it, you will get left behind. And so you have to learn the strategies in order to verify the output. Because I personally don't accept anyone that comes in and says, I'm not using AI because it's like, I don't know how to use it, or I don't know how to get the value out of it. You can,
I think generally speaking, you can't actually generalize a strategy that will work for business. I disagree.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
And the reason is, if you're one of the large incumbent players, if you're one of the consolidators at the top of the food chain, you probably should just be copying Tim Cook, which is they're just sitting on mountains of cash. And basically, they're just waiting for a startup to rise to the top that fits Apple, and they will just buy them. Yeah.
I mean, it is the enterprise dilemma, right? Like, it's not even an AI issue. It's just a large organization issue. Their risk profile means that they can't take risks, basically. They can't, push at the forefront of innovation.
Yeah.
But that means that they get left behind by the smaller startups who have a much bigger appetite for risk and so can innovate in the way that enterprises can't.
Yeah.
And so you get this rock and a hard place situation where you need to innovate to be able to survive in order to be able to sustain your business in the face of this new competition.
Yeah.
But you can't innovate because it introduces too much risk to your organization.
Yeah, and I think the way that, so for example, perfect example, the organizations that I think are at the greatest threat to AI, someone coming, basically bum rushing them, coming in from behind, are highly regulated.
Zerg rushing.
Zerg rushing.
StarCraft.
StarCraft reference. Nice. Zerglings.
Yeah.
First 2 minutes. Zerg. Yeah.
So who are they?
Highly regulated industries. Finance.
Okay.
I would say
Finance,
banks.
law,
I think banks and insurance companies are in for a world of hurt because fundamentally, insurance companies are giant compliance workflows. So it's basically like, because they're highly regulated by law, right? And so everything that they do has to be spot checked and like reference checked, and then they have to audit. They do a bunch of audit things. The types of products that they can offer have to fit a certain liquidity profile. All of this, they're very complex to operate businesses, but fundamentally, the product is extremely simple. which is basically like the three of us do the same thing. Why don't we put in a little bit of money each? And when one of us loses something, we all pay out to everybody else, right? And then every year we change the amount that we pay out based on, or pay in based on the amount we pay out. It's really simple to start an unregulated insurance company, and it's really easy to start an unregulated bank. But it's very hard to start a regulated insurance company, and also the only legal way you could do it. And it's also very hard to start a regulated insurance company, right? Insurance company and bank. So where our AI is particularly stellar at is navigating legislation. So the idea of a 5-person bank and a 5-person insurance company that can navigate regulation strikes me as something that is fundamentally very possible.
It is.
Yeah.
Because what you're just telling about is just a massive workflow with clear rules and decision trees throughout the whole process, right? Yeah. And so that's ripe for automation. That's ripe for AI.
Yeah. And I think that the unfortunate situation for those insurers and banks is they can't really change their organization too much because of the regulation. So they're kind of stuck with their operating model. So introducing AI for things like, like writing code for your mobile app, that's probably fine. But that's not really what we're talking about. We're not talking about people using chatbots in their day-to-day to like write better emails. We're talking about an insurance company that's like end-to-end, completely agentic. Because I mean, how many times have we bought insurance through a web portal?
Yeah,
everybody does that, right? So
although I don't know if I strongly believe this, but I'll challenge it a little bit. It comes back to what we were talking about before in terms of who takes responsibility, right? Like when large language models and stable diffusion and the generative art models started coming out, there was quite a seismic shift in the way people saw AI as a threat, people saw it as a threat to their jobs. Because prior to then, automation had been a threat to some people's jobs, but it was generally the high repeatability, constraint, like the sorts of things you do as an insurance adjuster or something where, you could almost write it down. Like they often worked through a series of instructions in a book. That's perfect for automating in a traditional computer system, right? Sure. But then once AI came out, it was like, actually, the first models were not very good at instruction following. You couldn't really use them to do that sort of coding, but they were really good at being creative. And so there was a bit of a seismic shift to be like, actually, maybe the first jobs that are going to go from AI are going to be the low-level creative work. And you do see that a bit, right? Like stock photography and like some of the video creation models now.
VO3.
Yeah.
It's absolutely phenomenal. Let's see that, yeah.
Yeah. And the risk when something goes wrong is way lower, right? Like if someone messes up your insurance plan and you end up not having coverage you thought you had, somebody's going to get sued, right? Yeah. But if you draw a hand with 6 fingers, someone might not even notice for, 20 years or ever. So as they get more capable of rule following, we're sort of coming back to a middle ground where they can do business process optimization. Exactly. But I think they are still a challenge to creative areas too.
Yeah, I think so too. But like the creative industry is I think it's a supply-demand thing that everyone's freaking out about.
Yeah.
I think the demand is quite high. Like I think the reason Hollywood budgets are the way they are, and the reason we have VFX and the types of content that gets produced, you constantly hear about lower budget content kind of going viral, being more profitable, right?
Of course,
because you can spit it out faster. So if you actually calm the farm and take a step back, the unlimited demand of the world, which is continuing to grow, and eventually there'll be an aging population problem, but that's like 40 or 50 years away. I can't see the creative industry going on in a decline.
No, definitely
I can see a lot of discomfort for people who have spent 10 years learning how Flame works, which is a post-production, a very specialized piece of post-production software, right?
Yeah.
So I think, but inherently creative people are creative. I'd like to think that people would be able to pick up these tools because the entire value proposition is that they're relatively easy to use.
Yeah. 100%.
So
humans' creativity is only...
And if you just type in make a movie,
yeah,
right? Like it's not going to give you anything interesting
No,
back.
Exactly. And because it's homogenized, right?
Yeah.
So the more generic your prompt, the more generic the output, because that's how statistics work.
Yeah.
And these models are statistically, they're grounded in statistical output. The interesting thing is I think Netflix will be like, the next Netflix will be segmented one. So basically you'll
Highly personalized.
come home,
Yeah.
it'll have some sense of when you turn on Netflix or Netflix 2.0 or, AI flicks,
Yeah.
it'll be like, hey, Dave, I can't let you, no.
Yeah. I can't let you watch that.
It'll be, hey, Dave, how was your day? Oh, great. So it'll probably start with a conversation. I think it will start with a conversation. How's your day gone? What do you feel like watching?
Some inputs,
It's time to
parameters.
unwind.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then you'll be like, cool, give me an hour. You go away, do something else, come back, and
Make
it's
dinner.
like it's a movie.
Personalized
That's
about your
personalized.
day. 100%.
Yeah.
It's fully.
Or the dystopian version of that. It's constantly monitoring your response, and it's trying to produce the most
Propaganda.
attention-seeking content that will keep the Coca-Cola ad in the background
That's
playing.
probably more likely.
So you were an optimist.
I
He's
was
a
close.
pessimist.
I was close. That's probably the real version. That's
And
probably
and what
actually
is it?
happens.
Jonah's awful Black Mirror episode and made come in real life. It's
Yeah, and then just
exactly
constantly
this.
ratcheting subscription
Yeah.
fees.
Yeah.
Like, for $9.95, for $10.95, for $12.95.
But yeah, no, to your point, human creativity will always be in infinite demand. And so the whole idea of AI
By humans. So
By
as
humans,
long as
yeah.
we survive, the demand will never end.
it's the same with generative any form of AI technology that is producing content. The whole idea of job displacement, it is going to happen and it's going to be significant, but there will be changes and shifts if you can figure out the very creative spots in which you can function and the future demand that's emerging. I think people don't realize, yes, AI is going to completely maybe automate or augment certain functions of society, but the future demand are where things are going to be massively open for potential. And that actually could be more fulfilling than the current monotonous low value tasks. Like if you ask people, like if we did a survey of how many people really enjoy their work, like really enjoy it, I think you'd be quite surprised that it's a minority.
I would not.
Maybe
I would say most of the
Maybe-
world.
okay,
I would say
there's-
10% if you're lucky.
There is
So-
a slightly
yeah.
psychological thing there, though, which is you're doing it for a long time, and if you don't do it, you starve to death. So even something that you really enjoy in that sort of situation starts to wear on you.
That is fair. That is the psychology of it. But I feel like there's so many people that are doing very tedious, monotonous work that are just to paycheck. And I believe the future demand that AI will create.
Were they all at builder.ai?
Yeah, exactly.
They were
Yeah.
building web pages?
You know, I feel for Builder.io because they're actually a Figma to
no.
code plugin company.
Oh, what's in the name?
And they've just got
Yeah.
bad associative PR right now.
yeah,
so
it's like, this is not us. Did you mean?
the question I'm trying to ask, right? Like for the first time, I think we're seeing a total restructure of titans completely changing their business models towards this whole agentic future.
Yeah.
Right. And so this is where I'm strongly of the belief that AI is not just another hype cycle. It is not like blockchain where the technology was simply a digital ledger that, could have applications, but isn't really like that revolutionary. We're talking about something that's really changing.
Oh, you just got us flamed in the comments.
I think
Elena, note to self, turn off comments on this one. I don't want any web bros, Web3 bros going, crypto's hodl, whatever. Lambo, to the
I
moon."
still think the value of I think an application of blockchain cryptocurrency is it's decent.
What they should do is create a coin that does inference. Because if you're mining, you're burning compute for heat and resource. You might as well just do inference.
There is a
is
sort of a failed coin is helping with inference.
Which is?
Because there was a coin that used proof of storage instead of proof of work or proof of
Do
ownership.
you mean proof of stake?
No, proof of storage.
I've never heard of that.
You'd
What
be
is
able-
that?
You'd buy it, like, because you're going to have
yeah.
some sort of cost to to have a blockchain work, right? And
Yeah.
proof of work is one way of
Validating.
validating that you've done some effort. Proof of storage is a way that you've paid for a hard drive, and that hard drive storage is
Exists.
the work that is used to operate the chain.
Is this coin just, owned via several shell companies that lead back to Seagate?
Well, so it has meant, because it's failed, a load of those drives are now being repurposed. Same as GPUs, actually. A lot like CoreWeave, which is now a huge AI GPU renter, got their start as a blockchain miner. They had, the reason they had all these GPUs is because they were doing blockchain stuff.
Yeah.
But also, same thing, all these hard drives are now being repurposed. But yeah, like the interesting side effect is if you buy a new Seagate drive now, loads of them are fake.
Anyway, what were we talking about? Agents?
He was trying to
I'm
ask a
trying
question.
to set the premise of a question, but it's like
Well, I have a really big one. Do you think an agent would spot the gigantic plot hole in Inception? It's in the middle of the movie. It's a gigantic plot hole, but
Yes.
it's glossed over.
Cool. So let's think about the movie Inception. It is an hour, 2 hours? 2.5 hours?
Oh, yeah.
So
a little bit more than that, actually.
2.5 hours would probably roughly equate to 2 to 3 million tokens. So right now, the largest language model is like 2 million tokens output, but even then it's kind of like constraint. And so you really need like a powerful, like maybe 10 million token context window. If you put that entire video and tokenize it, maybe via transcript or something, you've only got one modality. So you're going to have to almost create a different architecture, to a truly multimodal architecture that understands audio, understands video, understands the language that's spoken.
But you can spot this plot hole through the script.
Yeah.
You don't actually.
Yeah, but okay, then let's just remove the modalities. Let's just look at it text-wise. Get AI to really break down.
But what's the difference between that and just asking an LLM? Because if you asked an LLM, can we try it? Can we just ask Claude, like, what is the plot hole in the middle, in the bar scene? And
the thing is,
In the meantime,
Yeah, you could. You could.
Okay, so
while
what-
he's desperately trying to seriously answer this ridiculous question.
This is not a ridiculous question.
It's not.
I'm trying
I'm
to frame it in a funny way.
I'm
but
going to.
Most people don't know what an agent is. So if you could explain the real, tangible difference between an agent and a prompt into an LLM.
Okay.
Hamish is about to prompt an LLM to spot the
Yes.
plot hole.
So
what would an agent do?
An agent would be a high-level task. Can you spot the massive plot hole
Isn't
in
that
the middle
what
of the
goes into
movie?
the prompt, though?
Yeah, but here's the difference. You may get an answer. If he's using a non-reasoning model, it'll go very quickly and get the nearest pre-trained answer and give it back to him. But then Hamish will potentially have to like do some more prompts and tweak it a bit more to get the exact answer. Maybe it might hallucinate in the
And
first
that
go.
answer's encoded into the LLM or using a web search.
Yeah.
Would the web search count as agentic?
So web search is a function call. It's not necessarily agentic. The key between agents is Hamish gives a high-level task. It iteratively goes to its pre-trained knowledge, checks it, it does a web search, checks it. Maybe it has some foundational like RAG, I don't know. Maybe you've got like a file drive with the answer. It goes and tries to pull it, gets it, and then like formulates a response, gives it to you via a Slack message. That would be an agent, and all you did at the highest level was ask a question. But what Hamish is doing is not an agentic workflow.
Well, yeah, so I turned off web search because it depends on your definition, right? But you could consider web search to be part of an agentic workflow because you're enabling the LLM to perform an action for you, right?
True.
So if it doesn't know something and it's trained in memory and it doesn't hallucinate something from its trained in memory, then it can't answer that question without having access to some sort of tool.
That's true.
And so by giving it web search, you're giving it the power to perform an action on your behalf. Whereas beforehand, you would have had to do the web search yourself and then give the information in that web search to the LLM.
The LLM, copy paste it, however.
No, that's a pretty limited form of agentic behavior because the only thing you're letting it do is a web search,
Correct.
right? Whereas generally agents have more than just web search as a tool. But I turned it off specifically for this,
Yes.
for the pedants.
And
they couldn't argue that it was
web
still
search?
using an agentic flow. It does know, or it claims it knows, but it says
Which
it's
is?
about the kick. So the film establishes that to kick wake streamers up from dreams. However, this rule becomes problematic in the final act. And then it's got a big thing about how it's problematic. I'm not going to read the whole thing on
Well,
the
see, the
podcast.
thing
Apparently,
is,
there's 2 plot holes.
It then says some fans argue these aren't true plot holes, but rather demonstrate that the entire film is itself a dream.
It's clearly a dream.
well,
But then they can't. Be
that
any
could have
plot
been
holes.
pre-trained off a Reddit forum.
That's
Like, how can we know that to be true, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's the if we come back to the core of an AI agent, it's a confined environment that is self-learning, right? It's a high-level task. The highest level task you could go. Let's do a software engineering example. The highest level task is you've had an initial meeting with a client, and the client comes back and is like, "I want you to build this app," right? You at the highest level go and say, "Build this app." And if you have a truly sophisticated agent that has access to a code editor, access to web documentation, access to an environment where it can spin up a Docker container, do some tests, validate that it's true, come back, produce it, deploy it, and then you can click it via a website, all from that high-level prompt, that's a full agentic workflow. And there are so many steps involved in that, as we know as engineers. It probably will fail. It'll probably go back, use its error messages to go and correct itself. But at the highest level, it'll be a V1 of what you asked for. That is an agent, right? You can get there. In the meanwhile, you have Cursor, you have Claude, you have your own web, you have a container, Docker container, and you as the human is in between translating the high-level requirements, building the code out, then testing it, then releasing it. You're following an agentic workflow, but you're still the human in the loop that is there. I guess this is where it kind of contradicts ourselves. Like, I want to be able to human in the loop check. So how do you actually human in the loop check a fully agentic workflow? How do you podcast name an agentic workflow is what I'm asking.
So a lot of it is most agentic systems at the moment ask you before performing actions.
Yes.
Right? You can put it into YOLO mode and just say, "Don't ask me, go ahead and do it." But most of the time, agentic workflows.
YOLO, as in you only live once, not you only look once, which is a computer vision model.
Is that a thing?
Yeah, it's a computer vision model.
Yes,
Yeah.
it is.
Funny.
Yes,
So,
YOLO as in the thing young people no longer say.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's a philosophical thing when you think about it.
Yeah. But like the generally
That's
these
true. I'm
systems will
Buddhist. I don't
say,
believe in YOLO.
"I want to do this.
Molo.
Can you let me?" Right, so that you can check the action that it's going to take before it takes it. But that then has scaling problems, right? Like if you have to check every action it's going to take, sometimes agents might take 20, 30, 40 actions.
That is true.
And, if you want to go through and try and understand every action, like, if you've asked somebody to clean the house, they don't come and say, "Can I vacuum this part of the floor?" Okay, cool. "Can I vacuum this part of the floor?" Okay, cool.
Oh,
"Can I
check.
vacuum this
Yeah.
part of the floor?" Okay, cool. "Can I vacuum this part of the you get pretty sick for that pretty quickly. But that's coming up with a good heuristic to say this sort of agentic action you don't need to ask me permission for, and this sort of agentic action you do need to ask me permission for. That's tricky.
That is true.
Yeah, and that's I think where agentic systems have to go is like they have to find a way to have a malleable part of the model where you can run a small training, because you what you're doing is it's an analogy for a human, right? You get an engineer into your team, and then you train them on what your expectations are, and then they go and do stuff and try to match your expectations, and you check in and correct, but on a much larger cadence because humans right now are more capable than standalone LLMs and agents, right?
Well, a full end-to-end workflow, that is. But if you actually break it down to clear, like if you ask a large language model to build a function compared to, just say, an intermediate programmer, I don't want to say senior,
Yeah.
the large language model will beat the intermediate.
Possibly. I mean, that's
it
only if
depends on
you're staying
complexity,
in the
but yeah.
digital realm, right? Like an
That's
intermediate programmer can still get up and go and tap Danu on the shoulder and say, "Hey, you haven't replied to my Slack. Can you
Yeah.
give me an answer to this question?" Right? And even a fully powerful agentic LLM is still limited to only accessing
That's
And
fair.
there
digital
are
realm.
plenty of. I think there's if you've worked in industry as long as we have, maybe not you, little baby boy.
Revealing my age.
There are entire layers to the economy that exist that are highly specialized that we rely on day to day, and they are not part of the corpus that most LLMs have been trained on. So there's a very
True.
extreme example,
Yeah.
which is the Voyager spacecraft. That thing is like the furthest thing we've ever pushed an object out into space. It's still responding, and it's got a nuclear reactor on board, so it's not going to run out of energy for a while. But there's exactly 2 microprocessors, free-scale microprocessors. One of them is in a NASA office, and the other one is on the spaceship. And there is one guy who's retiring next year
That knows how to operate.
knows all of the quirks of that chip. So NASA has a massive drive right now to hire 4 or 5 people so that that guy can train all of these people that they're going to hire on how to, because that chip has bugs in it. So
And
when
if it-
Freescale designed it, there were problems, and like, Intel's famous division by zero problem, it's quite common for microprocessors to go out with issues in them that get patched over in software. And we've had that multiple
But when
times,
you're
right?
doing it in space, you can't. You have
Well,
no
that's
room
the
for
exact
error.
thing, right? There's so many systems that the world relies on that LLMs have no idea about.
For sure.
And that's why I think the disruption isn't going to happen the way we think it's going to happen, but it's going to happen in pockets of the economy.
I
And
agree.
A lot of stuff that's B2C will get disrupted very quickly. And even insurance companies and banks, because they're so heavily regulated, there's a lot of banks still running on AT360 mainframes. Yeah, IBM's managed to put a cloud layer in front of one of those and then have all these like interpreter things. But there's so much code that is written in COBOL, Fortran, PLC, C++, C that is not public knowledge. And I don't know if you've seen control code for C.
Yeah, it's pretty embedded.
It doesn't even, some of that shit doesn't even make sense. Like you literally need the human to be like, why did you cast that to void and then back out to int and then back to void? And there'll be some compiler quirk that a human has found that is completely undocumented, that lives in someone's memory somewhere,
For sure.
that will never justify a quantum of data that an LLM would pick up. So even if you wrote that information down, it happens so infrequently, but as part of a mission critical system, that an AI trained with that data point would still be unable to produce the result because of the way the technology is today. That might change when we have quantum, when we can take a data point of 1 and build a model that can extrapolate out. But there are definitely inherent limitations of the technology. And I don't think it's a blanket, the whole economy's going to disappear
Totally.
overnight. Yeah.
But what you're talking about is data pools. All these data pools that exist in a company that are highly specialized, highly domain specific. So a perfect example, I totally agree. When all of the large language models are trained on public knowledge, that's very limited. There's a lot of quirks, as you mentioned, that are very domain specific. But what is to stop an organization to have a sophisticated data strategy, get all of that data in place and train their all internal kind of closed gardened AI model to produce the content that you're talking about? What's stopping them there?
I think that that's how you have to formulate your data strategy. But the idea that everything is written down is just not true.
That's not true.
It's not even achievable. There's people that have made changes to software systems.
You're talking about tacit knowledge. Yeah.
Exactly. There's so much shit that's like in between that will never be written down, and no one has an incentive to write it down. So it won't get written down.
Pulling it back to the agent flow, right? Like that's one of the things agentic flows are trying to fix, right? Like how did that guy come up with the cast from void to int and then back to void, right? Like it's because maybe he doesn't know why it fixed the compiler bug. It's just like I tried some random shit.
Voodoo
and this
chicken coding.
one, yeah.
Just like I tried 10 things, that one worked, so I kept it.
How did the guy figure out how to get that free scale CPU to work, right? He learned all that stuff, right? So agentic flows are supposed to give LLMs the ability to work things out themselves too. Now, at the moment, they are still limited, but I think that's, assuming AI continues to scale, which is an open question we can't do in 2 minutes, that's how we're going to solve these things where there just isn't sufficient data for an AI to learn on.
Yeah, it would
the same
have
way a human
work to
figures
discover
it
it,
out.
right?
Yeah.
So that enabling the agent to discover the same information implicitly. But there are economic limitations to that.
Yeah.
Like the reason the mainframe hasn't been upgraded is because the cost of the upgrade and the downtime is way more than just letting Hank fix the CSV file every morning. Right? Like these are like real stories because there's a guy named Hank who fixes a CSV file at a mission critical mainframe that I know about. Like
That's fair.
because it's cheaper to pay Hank. Like they pay him $200,000 to show up for 2 hours every morning. This is a true story. I can't say who, obviously.
I'm not doubting it. I came from enterprise.
He gets paid $200,000. The guy's like past retirement.
$200,000 a year or every time he turns up?
$200,000 a year.
Yeah,
but he's retired. He works
because otherwise Hank isn't long for this world.
he works 2 hours a day, right? Hank shows up, has his coffee, fixes the CSV file, kicks the mainframe, and goes home. And he does that every morning. Yeah. And there's no other alternative Hank. When Hank's sick, the CSV file doesn't go through. Like, these are true, like, because it is cheaper for the insurance company, like $200,000. You're not gonna abstract out the mainframe, teach an agent to to be able to patch whatever the hell's going on there, and then figure out how to upgrade all of that stuff to .NET, like for less than $200,000. Like, it's just not going to happen. So unfortunately, humans are very cheap.
But you know what? To Hamish's point, though, it was a trial and error with a bit of intuition to find that particular quirk that a human came up with. The new paper, I read a recent one from Google, Alpha Evolve. So there was two key enablers that solved a 56-year-old maths multiplication problem to reduce it by one multiple factor, right?
So I think those are the opportunities where leapfrogging.
That's
white
massive.
Space is massive, and then leapfrogging process, because right now we can't imagine not having Hank, right? Yeah. But maybe the AI or an agent could come up with a workflow that.
But I mean, AI isn't going to fundamentally change the incentives in the economy. Right, like it will make some things more efficient and some things less efficient. But there's lots of shitty process that we put up with because it's just not worth fixing. Right, like, okay, he gets paid $200K, but for an insurance company, that's probably still there's plenty of problems even at Rush where we're like, we'd like to fix that, but we just have other things we want to concentrate on. It's not really causing a problem, right? Like, and maybe we'll get to the point that AI agents are just sitting in the background like janitor agents, basically, that are just going through, looking for all of the issues. But, that's still, there's fundamentally going to be a limit where we're like, it's not worth paying even the janitor AI his union mandated salary to fix those issues.
Yeah, I think
fair.
It will eventually erode, right? So if the B2C layers and the more flexible layers that have less legacy in them do erode rapidly from agentic, which is highly probable because they have less Hanks to deal with, then eventually that layer becomes faster and more efficient, which means that focus changes. So you go down to the next layer. So I think it's not going to happen overnight, but I think it's going to be a layered approach where the complexity out in front becomes simplified down, so focus and attention and resources keep flowing down until they get to Hank. So
I see.
The only problem with that and the only counter argument is companies are driven towards profit.
Yes.
And typically in business, optimizing your costs does not lead to a profitable outcome, right? You can only manage your costs so much.
Yep. Like it's scaled. It has a wall.
Yeah. In business, the best thing to do is grow your revenue.
Of course.
So as soon as you start optimizing those B2C layers, it makes a lot more business sense to not worry about your operational layer and kind of go, those costs are fixed for now.
Okay.
And allocate the majority of your resources to growing revenue.
Yeah.
That's a good outcome for everyone, in my opinion. Whether it plays out that way is going to be, who knows?
Well, you're talking about specific parts of the AI stack, right? The highest layer, which is application, B2C, consumer facing. This is where all of the startups are. All the things you hear where VCs are pouring in millions and billions of dollars to raise capital, those are all sitting in that layer. There's a middle layer, which is the orchestration layer between the GPUs and the large language models or the application, which is largely untouched because it's process oriented, it's operations. But then there's the hardware layer, which you just can't even touch because that's NVIDIA and unless you got billions of dollars and want to set up a colossus. Elon
was on a video saying minimum price of entry for hardware is like $250 million minimum.
Yeah, but
like,
it's gold. And you need
nuclear
power. Not when you can steal all the GPUs from your other company that you own.
Yeah, but arguably he stole $250 million worth of GPUs.
So we are at time. Do you want to give like a 2-minute try and each give a 2-minute wrap up of?
No.
Agent
says no.
Good luck editing this.
This is a highly, highly intellectual conversation. Not in the sense that we're smart, just that we used a lot of words that we don't even know what we used. And so we have to go and fact check this entire conversation. But if you want to...
Elena will do that.
Yes. We tried to talk about how... I think we did successfully talk about how AI agents work, the positives and negatives of large language models, and how the outputs may not be as set in stone as we want. Then we went into various references that I didn't really understand, but because it's way past my time. And
He's basically calling us old to our faces. He just like looked at me like straight in the eye. He's like, "You're fucking old."
but at the
You're
end, I
so
think
old, you
so
know what the
fucking old.
Matrix is. You saw it in the theaters, grandpa.